In this video, we will learn how to develop a basic Android application. We will learn the structure of an Android application. So first, start the Android Studio. Click on Start a new Android Studio project. Select the empty activity. At least for our intro course, click on empty activity. Click Next. Give a name for your application. Give some package name. Select the save location. Now click Finish. Now, if you remember MVC architecture, you should know that Android Studio or the development of an Android application by default supports this MVC. It is always divided into two components. You will have this Java class. So the functionality is usually written in the Java class, which acts as a model. Then you have an XML file associated with the Java class. So over here, always the entry point or the entry class is main activity. And we always have an associated UI file called with the same name. So you see in this case, the Java file acts as the model class and the corresponding XML file acts as the view. Okay. You need to get used to the folder locations. So always in Java, you will have your package and then you will have your Java class and you will have the corresponding UI file in resource directory under layout. Now, what I would suggest is rather than dragging and dropping the UI elements over here, I would suggest it is always better to code rather than drag and drop the UI. So if you have an older version of Android Studio, you would usually have two buttons over here. One would be the design view and one would be the programmatic view. So you would have an option to change between the different perspectives at the bottom. But if you have a newer version of Android Studio, then you can change between the different views over here. This is entirely the coding view, and this is a split between the code and the UI. That is, when you start making changes over here, you will be able to see a preview over here. Okay, so now let's make this a habit to always take this XMLNS line on the next line. We won't be using constraint layout. In our course, what we will usually be using is linear layout. Change that over here. Just do a slash. Remove this text view. Now, I need to show you the most basic and the most commonly used elements in an Android application. So, one is the text view. What I would suggest is never type the entire thing by yourself. Android Studio is smart and you should have an habit of usually selecting the suggestions because it helps you to increase the speed of your development. Now, a shortcut that you can always use for suggestions is Control plus space. Then select the element that you need. Over here, you can see the layout. Now, once you have a widget on the screen, these are the two parameters which should always be there, which is width and the height. In this case, what match parent means is that when you have a widget in terms of width, it will take the entire space of the parent. If you have wrap content, then what happens is, in fact, let me show you with an example. So always give an ID to your elements. Give some text. and then just do a slash, a forward slash, and it will automatically close the brackets for you. Now, first try wrap content. Okay, so as you can see, the width is taking the space only as much as the text you have in. Okay, the same goes for height. So it will take the space only as much required by this text. Now this becomes responsive. So let's say if you give a size, text size, if you increase the text size to, let's say, 30 dp, you see how it expands. It becomes responsive because of wrap content. Now let's change it to match parent. So what happens is it takes the entire space. Okay, these are called attributes, and this is called a widget. So text view is the widget. ID, layout width, height, text size, text are the attributes of the widget text view. In a similar way, we can add a button. Okay, these are the necessary same attributes which you always need to add for a widget. So again, let's do wrap content. Let's add an ID. Let's add some text. Let's say you want to take some input from the user. Then we have a widget called as edit text. In terms of edit text, so this is how you create a widget, and this is how you provide different attributes to customize it according to the look that you want. So let's say you want to change a color, then just type color. Okay, you don't need to remember or know all the attributes by heart. Always use these suggestions. Most of your work will be done with the help of the IDE, that is Android Studio. Now, this doesn't look professional, right? Let's say we want every new element to be added should be one below the other. Because see, if I add, let's say, one more text view, so it always goes side by side. Okay, what we want to do is, like, we want all the widgets to be one below the other. So you see, this linear layout is like a panel. Okay, so it's a canvas where you are drawing something. Okay, so linear layout is the root element on which you are drawing your widgets. Let's add an attribute over here called as orientation. Select the orientation as vertical. This looks a bit better. Now, let's say we want all of these elements to be in the center of the screen. What we would do is we would use an attribute called gravity, not layout gravity. We will use gravity and select center. Okay, so this is how you would manipulate the view. The language we are using to create the view is XML. I hope you are able to correlate the MVC architecture now. The coding for the view is entirely different. We keep everything separate. Okay, let's say we need to take some kind of input from the user. Okay, so for that we have a widget called as edit text. Now for edit text, we don't, let's say edit text is a text box where you take the input. We usually, according to the standards or according to what you have seen in any application, The input box should never increase or decrease according to the input given by the user. It should have a definite size. Okay, we would do something like this. And height should be wrap content so that it adapts to the input. Sorry, and layout height should be wrap content so that it adapts to the text size. Okay. Let's say you want to indicate what this field is for. Okay. If you type text, what happens is when you run this application, so now when you see, you don't want this to happen, right? You only need an indication. You don't want that whenever the user runs the application, he gets the input field like this and he has to remove the text. For that, what we can do is rather than using text, we will use an attribute called hint. Okay, and let's say you want this hint to be in the middle of the screen. Again, just give gravity as center. Now let's have a look at this application. Now you see, you don't have to change the field. Now you see that this text view is very close to the input field. And let's say we want some space between both of them. We can use an attribute called as margin, and we want the margin to be at the bottom. And now we can increase or decrease the size according to how much space we need. So let's say 50. Let's run the application. Much better. Let's also add some space between the input field, that is edit text, and the button. This looks much better. Okay. Now we have the view. Now you remember that the purpose of the view is only to interact with the user. In this case, our manifest is the controller, but luckily we don't have to deal with it right now. It automatically sends the data and the request to the manifest file, and this controller, in addition to a file called as R, so manifest in addition to a file called as R act as controller and send the request to the model, which is our main activity.java, or in general just the Java class. Let's add some functionality to the view. The first step is declaration. We first need to declare these variables. Okay, so what are the elements that we have? We have text view, we have an input field called as edit text, and we have a button. Okay, now we need to understand what is onCreate. So all the Android applications go through a life cycle, which we will see later on in the class. Right now, what you need to understand is onCreate is a part of the Android activity lifecycle where the elements are initialized or the functionalities are initialized. Okay, so this is just the declaration. Now we will initialize them. And how do we do it? So we need to use this function called as find view by ID. I just now mentioned a file called as R. The purpose of R is to store the IDs of the view elements in the form of integers. Now, what you need to understand is uh, any computer system cannot understand human language. It cannot understand string. So, when you give a particular view or widget element an ID, it is usually converted into an integer, that is a number, so that the computer system can understand. And that number is stored in R file. So we do r.id, whatever name we gave to text view, which is text1 in our case. So this string is what we use. When we do r.id.text1, it retrieves the integer so that this element can understand what we are referencing to. In a similar way, find view by the ID, which is stored in the R file, as user input. Now, let's say in this application, we take some input from the user and then we will apply that input to the text view. Okay, but that will happen when the user interacts with this button. Okay, so what we will do is we will use a functionality or a listener called as on set on click listener. Okay, and then what we will do is type this. This means referencing this particular object, this particular instance of the object. Okay, now it is giving you an error, right? This is referencing to this particular instance of an object. If you don't understand the meaning of this, you can let it go for now. But to resolve this error, what you need to do is Alt plus Enter and then select the second option, which is make main activity implement android.view.onClickListener. Select the first option, press OK. It will automatically generate a function called onClick. Now, type this. So what we are doing is, let's say you have multiple buttons, okay? Button 1, button 2, button 3. This on click, so when you type this for each button, when user, let's say, clicks button 2, okay, the control will be transferred to this on click function, okay? See, we are using set on click listener. All of the buttons are referencing to this. So when a user clicks one of these buttons, the control will be transferred to the function called onClick, which is taken as a view object. We use the switch, which is like if else. It gets the ID of the view element. So let's say we have button. In this case, the ID is btn. So we do switch v.getID. If the case is that r.id.btn, then we need to add a functionality. Okay, so in our case, the functionality is we first create a string variable called input. From where are we getting the input? It is from the edit text. So we call the get text function and then we convert it to string format. Okay. So we are getting the input from the edit text, which is the input box. We convert it to the string and store it into the variable called input. Now, where do we want to show it? The text view, right? So we do tv.setText and put the element. So that's it. We have added the functionality to the button. Now let's try it out. Let's give an input. Click submit. So we have the basic Android application running. I hope you have understood the elements. If you have any doubts, we could discuss it during the Zoom meeting. Do implement it by yourself and let me know if you are coming across any error.